What are the signs we should be looking for? Who will be delivering them? And who will be receiving them? The answer in this video is the translated beings. Characteristics and attributes of specifically modern day John the Beloved, also known as John the Revelator. Proverbs 24, verse 24. He that saith unto the wicked, Thou art righteous, him shall the people curse, nations shall abhor him. But to them that rebuke him shall be delight, and a good blessing shall come upon them. Prepare thy work without, and make it fit for thyself in the field. And afterwards build thine house. Be not a witness against thy neighbor without cause, and deceive not with thy lips. Say not, I will do so to him as he hath done to me. I will render to the man according to his work. I went by the field of the slothful, and by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it was all grown over with thorns, and nettles had covered the face thereof, and the stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction, yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travelleth, and thy want as an armed man. The ability to communicate. How would you maintain the ability to communicate across generations, across languages, and the devolution of slang meanings infiltrating the language? If you were to live for 2,000 years, we're going to construct a profile of one of these translated beings, John the Beloved. A pattern has emerged from various reports of traits describing a translated being felt to be John the Revelator. Considering the changes you see in the language during your lifetime, consider the new words that are added on a monthly basis. You see yourself needing to communicate with the general population centuries into the future. What words and usage of words would you maintain? What manner of speaking would you adopt? Given the scientific understanding that, quote, you only have a few seconds to make a good impression, you are given a message of salvation to all you encounter. If you do not make an impression, they will forget you. They may not give you attention that you need. You only have those few seconds before the average person will dismiss you. What would you say to a busy individual who needs to hear your message, which pertains to their and others' salvation? We have some complaints regarding the loss of our language. It's always been the case, but in the modern era of the 21st centuries, some of the slang words and new meanings of words and corrupted words have created a more confusing challenge when we try to communicate with people with our word choice. We would be wise to avoid what used to be normal words that have been corrupted, addressing the challenges of maintaining the ability of one generation to communicate to the next. Here's a letter to the editor, the East Carolinian. This was October 26, 2021, complaining about some of these new words, which I will not read. Talking about the fabricated words, we talk about context, how there's a sentence, in almost any sentence you can add an emphasis to a certain syllable and change the meaning of the context. A lot of people are not realizing the challenge of choosing the right words when you communicate, using the right emphasis on each word, because a simple apostrophe can alter the meaning of what you're trying to communicate. It's what people hear that matters. There's commonalities in reports about John the Revelator, and this is versus other translated beings. We're going to show some of these examples that we have. They may not all pertain to John the Revelator, but we're trying to find similarities here. And the challenge a person such as this would have is, what do you say to be interesting and memorable to someone that you meet? You need to get their attention. You need to cause them to pause and think, contemplate realities and meanings. It's a very common observation to say of John that he uses peculiar words. He has a peculiar use of the English language, which is actually skillful use of the English language. How would you craft your word choice if you were him? Would you use parables or metaphors? How important would it be to have something different than the average conversation starter? Speaking of his odd way of speaking, here's an example. A report from a viewer in Canada, French-speaking Quebec, said this: "One more thing, a detail I can say about John is his odd way of speaking. It's more like a painting. It's very poetic in the sense that he could evoke images with his words. It's quite peculiar and colorful. I can only suppose it's coming from his mastery of many languages over the centuries." Another individual reports of a letter he received from John the Revelator. His letter was full of strange statements and numbers. As he speaks, he also writes. How would you craft your word choice? Here's an example of how it was explained John the Revelator spoke. The next day, a strange-looking old man with a cane came down our driveway as we were outside and said, "I have come to stay with you as you have asked me to." He went on to introduce himself and said his name's, in this case, he gave the name James Farrell rather than John. James Farrell, whom I believed by now was not a Nephite but John the Revelator, gave me to understand that they were told to walk the streets and their walks were sending out evil vibrations. Though they were very tired, as I was from walking so much with James Farrell, they had to do as the devil, their master, directed them to do. So he spent some time with this individual and came to understand the powers that be that control people. He spoke often when we were in the hotel room as though he were talking to the devils and giving them warnings. Once he said if they didn't quit forcing their followers on the streets to do so much walking and let them have some rest, there would be something done about it. Now, might this observation give some insight on what it is that John the Revelator is aware of? He's in tune with things that are not visible to your average person. He's in tune with the spirits that are present that may be good or evil. In this case, he's contending with those who are walking around and doing as their master, the devil, tells them to do. He spoke often about these individual spirits and he gave them warnings. There's questions about what conditions precipitate a visit from a translated being. Yearning for truth, spirituality is typically, it might involve the element of prayer from the individual who's seeking for truth and willing to learn what the truth is at any cost. Answer to prayers that may come in the form of enlightenment that you in no way anticipated. For example, or therefore an awakening to a sense of your awful situation, in direct contradiction to beliefs. Alma 11:37, the quote is, "You cannot be saved in your sins." An awakening may involve coming to a knowledge of gospel principles necessary for salvation that possibly you previously held or espoused. When an awakening towards the pathway to salvation requires you to turn back the clock on generations of propaganda that have become embedded in your culture, who can stand such a test? Blessings are not typically of the temporal variety. A spiritual awakening to gospel truths does not necessarily align to earthly rewards. Discussions on the deceptions we have all fallen prey to are too uncomfortable. A visit from a translated being may not be what you anticipated. In the Doctrine and Covenants, section 101, verse 44 to 54, it says, A certain nobleman had a spot of land very choice, and he said unto his servants, Go ye unto my vineyard, even unto this very choice piece of land, and plant 12 olive trees, and set watchmen around about them, and built a tower, that one may overlook the land round about, to be a watchman upon the tower, that mine olive trees may not be broken down when the enemy shall come to spoil and take upon themselves the fruit of my vineyard. Now the servants of the nobleman went and did as their lord had commanded them, and planted the olive trees, and built a hedge round about, and set watchmen, and began to build a tower. And while they were yet laying the foundation thereof, they began to say among themselves, And what need hath my lord of this tower? And consulted for a long time, saying among themselves, What need hath my lord of this tower, seeing this is a time of peace? Might not this money be given to the exchangers? For there is no need of these things. And while they were at variance one with another, they became very slothful, and they hearkened not unto the commandments of their lord. And the enemy came by night, and broke down the hedge, and the servants of the nobleman rose, and were affrighted, and fled. And the enemy destroyed their works, and broke down the olive trees. Now behold, the nobleman, the lord of the vineyard, called upon his servants, and said unto them, Why, what is the cause of this great evil? Ought ye not to have done even as I commanded you? And after ye had planted the vineyard, and built the hedge round about, and set watchmen upon the walls thereof, built the tower also, and set a watchman upon the tower, and watched for my vineyard, and not have fallen asleep, lest the enemy should come upon you? And behold, the watchman upon the tower would have seen the enemy, while he was yet afar off. And then ye could have made ready, and kept the enemy from breaking down the hedge thereof, and saved my vineyard from the hands of the destroyer. What role does a watchman play? If a watchman does come to the rest of the servants and reports the enemy is approaching, how will they react? Will they do as the scripture advises, or will they turn on that messenger and try to destroy him? We're going to give some examples reported from various individuals. Again, there was one incident where it was reported in a stop to refuel his vehicle, a man sees an elderly man glaring at him, holding a cane. Without speaking, the older man starts slamming the end of the cane several times on the concrete while maintaining his glare on this unsuspecting younger man. The feeling is there is a rebuke by this older man who is unlike any other ordinary man. A different account of being rebuked. So we are building a picture here. John the Revelator is not someone that comes in friendliness and joy. He has a reason if he's going to visit you. It may not be the one you wished for. It may be a visit to be rebuked. Quote, being in my home on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I heard a booming voice from down the street, over a block away, using stern words of rebuke and disappointment, that someone is viewed as slothful and not living up to their obligations. I heard the voice coming closer and growing louder, projected directly towards my home, and even though there were hundreds of residents in range of hearing this person, an eerie feeling came over me that his words were directed at me. It was so loud and was so embarrassing that he is coming closer to my home, and there was no way. The man continued, there's no way the entire neighborhood was not aware of some situation occurring right where I was living. The man continued to project his voice in a very directional manner, directly where I was sitting in the home where I grew up. You know the hopeless feeling of wishing he would just stop shouting and going away. While knowing and expecting him to leave myself and other people alone, it wasn't going to happen. I heard him walking closer and closer and shouting louder and louder at the direction of my house and not letting up on his words of condemnation. To think this scene was playing out in front of the neighbors, who surely are aware of some sort of disturbance is taking place near your house from such a loud and angry man, was both unnerving and humiliating. Worse, the tone of authority in this man's strong rebuke was paralyzing. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Any thought of opening the door and going outside to see what his purpose was or why he was doing this was unbearable, as was the thought of confronting or speaking to him. Definitely felt like a very foolish thought, and one which I might regret. He finally passed our house, but still kept his voice aimed at our house, and he continued rebuking me as he passed. He then headed up the street. He turned and looked back where we were and continued his rebuke. About the time he finally passed and was almost through with his yelling, my father, who was upstairs in this house, cheerfully asked me, "Who is that?" He asked from the other room. "I wonder what he wants." I quickly dismissed the notion as this being anyone other than someone who is not in his right mind, and I let my father know that, using choice words to describe this stranger who invaded my peace and tranquility that day. I was, after all, minding my own business. Nevertheless, my father's reaction was not judgmental, but nevertheless very neutral towards my spiteful words of the stranger. He mutters an okay, not necessarily an okay in an agreement in his response, as he sensed this stranger was not just an ordinary man who was for no reason acting strangely. This is another one, similar. We correct the grammar sometimes when it is from a viewer that may not have English as their primary language. So there was minor corrections. One Sunday, as we drove in, Mom got out to talk to Dad, which was unusual. After a low-toned discussion between them, they explained to us that a beggar had come and asked for peanut butter and coffee in the name of Jesus Christ. He said to Mom he had not eaten in many days. Mom served him as he wished. He ate most of the bread put in front of him, drank all the coffee he could, plus most of the dinner that was prepared for the family. During his meal, he recounted how he was mistreated by other people. Then he said he had to leave, being in a hurry, so Mom said we would have dinner since there wasn't enough for us all. We all looked at each other and said it was okay. We could wait for supper without an issue. We went on our day as usual. In the following days, a white van stopped at our house. The tall, grumpy man asked us to identify our family and said he was asked to deliver boxes from a Sister Denise from our local convent. He proceeded to empty the van with large banana boxes of food of all kinds. He didn't talk. He would not accept help. He seemed angry and frustrated to be here. The long kitchen table and sitting benches were full when he left. I was outside, and as he opened the door and told him thank you and God bless you, I was astonished by his reaction. He roared like a lion that had just been whipped. He left the yard, but I never saw the van go around the house and leave our little valley. During school, I went to see Sister Denise to thank her for the boxes. That old stern sister looked at me and told me she had nothing to do with it. She had not sent this man to us. A visit from a translated being, again the same one. I later learned the man that had asked for dinner was named John. He was dressed with a long coat with a head on his collar and ash on his head, and his face had a coal marking. All the old signs of a Jewish man mourning a loved one. John came over to our family for many years, sometimes staying over for the night. My dad had long discussions with him, which I don't recall the content of. I always suspected he was responsible for the food boxes. Over the years, we realized that his coming was always accompanied with blessings of different kinds. The last time he was home, I was in my early 20s and had begun suspecting he was the apostle of the Lord. After trying to have his views on the book of Revelation, he only commented that many people would die and suffer. That just confirms it for me. I looked at him and told him I thought I knew who he was. I didn't know why he was at our home, and thanked him for being with us. The next day when he left, I saw him vanish in a swirl of blue and white light, never to see him again. Today, knowing that he most likely could read my mind when I tried to make him come out of being anonymous, I realized it was foolish on my part to do so. Physically, he is a skinny guy, 150, 160 pounds. He fasted a lot. Around 5'9", that'd be 60 years old or older. Very short hair, fresh from the barbershop, and a week-long beard. I never saw him with longer hair or beard. Last thing we had on our kitchen wall, a painting by numbers scene of the Last Supper, something you would buy and paint in the shaded areas yourself, apparently. Sometimes he would look at that ugly painting, it was badly done, and go silent. My feeling was he was remembering stuff, and his sadness would show in his presence. I never saw anyone look at that painting like he did. It's one more cue that made me think he was the beloved one, beyond the fact that whatever he asked was in the name of Jesus Christ. A meal, socks, a coat over the years, and he wouldn't be seen within seconds of leaving our yard. The same viewer has stated, he doesn't teach with words, but leads by example. He is no nonsense. He says and does things with a purpose. Again, it's corroborated by more than one. He's older than 60, of average height and build, somewhere 5'9" to 5'11" is what some of these reports say. His manner of speaking and doing is described as peculiar, speaking in parables or metaphors, such as the fools, they think it is the end when they go down in the pit. After trying to have his views on the book of Revelation, he only commented that many people would die and suffer. He cites his authority when making a request, that being the Savior. Jesus spoke in parables to make his teachings clearer to his audience. The creative and colorful use of the English language that John the Revelator is using in these reports indicates he's mastered the language over hundreds and hundreds of years. He might ask for something or a type of food he already knows you have. One year he asked for socks, old socks, or an old coat, if we had one. I went upstairs to my bedroom with Louise, Dad's wife, to roam through my drawer for socks. I suggested to Louise to give him my newest socks because old socks would give him blisters or end up at the end of his toes in his boots. There is no way he could have heard that comment. But from the kitchen he would reject the idea and he insisted on old worn-out socks as if he was standing by us up in the bedroom. Both of us were in shock since we were whispering. This is one from Hazel Schill, March 1940, basically describing a similar individual. She considered him about 5'11", not entirely gray, but had streaks of gray at that time, 1940, at about 7 o'clock. I was going out into the yard taking care of some of the duties of the household, and upon opening the door, an elderly man stood about 4 feet from the kitchen door from which I had just come. He wore a beard but no mustache trimmed, and was tidily dressed with a dark suit. He wore a light gray overcoat of light weight. He looked very kind. His eyes were grayish blue, and he wore a light gray hat. Upon seeing him, he took off his hat and said, "Good morning, my dear. Can you spare time to fix me a bit of breakfast?" I at first thought I would say no, but he looked so kind and clean that I said, "Sure, Come in. Both of us walking toward the kitchen door and he following me. I set a chair before him and invited him to sit down, which he did. This being in the kitchen, I immediately started to fix breakfast for him. He sat and watched me, and soon he said, "It has been many years since I have been in this part of the Lord's vineyard." I was amazed at the growth of Mesa. I made some reply, which I do not now recall. He went on to ask, "Is the church growing rapidly?" To which I answered, "Yes, it is, especially here. My father came with the early pioneers, and I can remember as a child there were such a few, but now there are 10 wards in this state." He said, "My dear, your father was very fortunate to have been called as one of the pioneers. I have been in Mexico for many years laboring with that branch of the church." It struck me at the time as peculiar when he called it a branch. "You will live to see the day when that part of the Lord's vineyard and this part will be his brothers. I visited with the saints in California last week. The Lord is not pleased with his people there. They are living too fast. They let the real things of life slip behind while they take up the unimportant things. They are like the most part of the people now. They pray with their lips and have no faith in their hearts." Continuing, he said, "The condition of the world is dreadful. In Germany there are many of the Lord's choice people, and in no way could the gospel be spread, only through this dreadful war." Before going to the door, I handed him his hat, and he then said, "Good morning," and I replied, "Good morning," and he was gone. All the while my son, Robert Schill, was in the adjoining room from the kitchen, and after the stranger had left, he immediately came into the kitchen and said, "Mom, who was that man? He was the queerest talking man I ever heard." To which I replied, "I don't know, son, but he was dressed so well kept to be asking for breakfast." We both walked out of the house not more than 1 minute from the time he left the kitchen door, going clear to the road, which was about 300 feet from the kitchen, but could see no one. He could not be seen in any direction. The road going straight for 2 miles in either direction. I have wondered and pondered about it so much, and feel assured in my own heart it was one of the 3 Nephites. It would have taken at least a few minutes to go to the road, and we went out immediately after he left. Another man is reported an encounter with John the Revelator. Similar personality to what you've just heard in other reports. This is an excerpt from those experiences. Quote, "He told me to remember I had a friend, meaning the Savior. I spent a period of about 2 weeks with him in the home, and afterwards left it to stay at 2 different low-priced hotels he picked out in the downtown part of Salt Lake. We spent much of the time walking in the streets or staying in the hotel room, where he continually talked in parables, which I understood the meaning of, and he would tell me I had it right in my thoughts as I thought it. Many things were directed to my understanding I had never before considered, such as the conspiracy of Satan existing worldwide and concentrated in Salt Lake to destroy the church, such as existed in the Book of Mormon days. This was a number of years before the so-called John Birch Society came out publicly about such a conspiracy. James Farrell had told me to be sure I put out what I had received, which I tried to do, but was condemned as a communist, and the LDS Church sent men to my neighbors, telling them I was an evil man and to have nothing to do with me. One neighbor in friendly conversation warned me they were doing this. He had told them he couldn't see anything wrong with me, but they insisted I was evil without defining it to him. Once, as we were walking down the street, James Farrell told me, "These people don't know who you are, spreading lies without talking to you about how they confirm that." I was under a very solemn influence and felt eternity was at stake if I didn't do right. This was the result of the strange-looking old man finally accepting the invitation to come stay with him. This is the strange old man with a cane, who came down the driveway as we were outside said, I have come to stay with you as you have asked me to. So over the next few weeks, these are the experiences that were recorded. The downtown streets of Salt Lake seemed full of well-dressed people, as well as some, to my understanding, who were killers or, quote, hatchet men, as James Farrell described them, that because of him being with me, they had gathered from around the world for the occasion to see me, to know who their enemy was, and to exercise their evil against me, and also against my wife and children. I endured a form of Gethsemane. My wife had also told me later she had felt more terrible than she felt she could take. I was aware of this and asked James Farrell to help her. He said he stopped the worst evil, or she would have been a goner. I was given to understand the followers of Satan were exercising their minds against me. James Farrell, whom I believed by now was not a Nephite, but John the Revelator, gave me to understand they were told to walk the streets, as mentioned earlier, and their walks were sending out evil vibrations. Though they were very tired, as I was walking so much with James Farrell, they had to do as the devil, their master, directed them to do. He spoke often when we were in the hotel room, as though he were talking to the devils and giving them warnings. Once he said if they didn't quit forcing their followers on the streets to do so much walking and let them have some rest, there would be something done about it. On a Sunday morning, he said, let's go to the tabernacle. The doors were locked and the place was jam-packed with supposed tourists. He told me to get close and listen, and as I looked through the glass, I heard Richard Evans speaking the words, "We welcome you here who have come on your long, tiresome journey. Must we be driven from our homes because of communism?" The thought I had was that communism was a cover-up. The meaning was that the devil's conspiracy would be overthrown and they lose out because of myself and James Farrell. That was all I heard. And as we walked away from the temple ground, Farrell said, "They have to fear you coming back, Rich." As we neared First South and Main, he took a round Copenhagen tobacco box and said, "You have heard of Indian rope tricks? Watch this." He gave an underarm throw, and the tobacco box rolled into the intersection, rolled at least a dozen times in a circle in the middle of the intersection, then rolled to the sidewalk of the southeast side, rolled into a circle a dozen or so times close to the street, then started in a straight line at the building, which at that time was Montgomery Ward. A man looking in the glass window, evidently seeing the reflection behind him, saw it heading straight for him. It must have spooked him, for he hurriedly walked down the street. A man recognized as having followed us for several days around town. The box didn't quite reach the building, but turned and rolled back almost to the street and made several more circles before falling over. Only a power beyond mortal understanding could have caused such an event. Farrell showed me a program of LDS organ recital music, and only one song was a Mormon hymn, "Come, Come, Ye Saints." About 12 others were non-Mormon. There was a short explanation that the Mormon hymn encouraged the Mormons on their westward journey. The thought I had was that the conspiracy wouldn't allow the true spiritual uplifting music, the plain and simple pioneer hymns, to be played for the Mormons. They put the one Mormon hymn in with the mournful old world music to keep it from being obvious. Music is very important, and part of the devil's conspiracy to replace God's spirit in his plain and simple uplifting music with evil spirits instead. I was given the thought of the ways the conspiracy controlled people and sought complete control of them by television, radio, and newspapers. There were even hidden messages the conspiracy understood in the comics. This was one of their ways to pass directions to their followers. I was given the thought they controlled the church, the offshoot groups from the church, the city, the government, the world, and the businesses. Soon they would make an open attack on the church to completely destroy it. They hated the threat it presented against them, even though they now controlled it. They didn't want it to exist at all. Farrell gave me to understand they planned terrible things for me and my family, which, if I didn't endure, I was finished for all eternity. I suffered such thoughts and hoped to endure. I was being tested to prove my willingness to go through whatever would be required of me. I had the thought of the severe persecution and torture deaths of followers of Christ throughout the ages, and the war was still the same. If one wasn't willing to suffer persecution or death for Christ, he was not worthy of him and wouldn't be a part of his kingdom. The thought of losing mine and my family's salvation by not being able to endure made me aware of the solemnity of the eternity if I didn't pay whatever price was required. Something on the order of Gethsemane. Farrell said he lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He showed me a paper the Dishwashers Union in Minneapolis put out, of which he was a member of. It contained a small article saying, "Who is this man, James Farrell, a member of our union? He comes in often and politely asks if we have a job for him. And when we don't, he politely and cheerfully thanks us nicely." There is something very unusual about James Farrell. We have a strange feeling he is not just an ordinary man. Evidently, the Dishwashers Union from another state could sense John the Revelator more than the LDS Church type of people. Farrell told me he gave others the same opportunity he gave me, but they all turned him down when the trial got a little severe, like I was going through, and he never spoke to them again. I was suffering the knowledge of Satan's conspiracy and being made aware of how its evil power controlled the world, and that many handed their secret plans, signs, and such down to their children from generation to generation, the same as in the Book of Mormon days. Farrell had fixed a little altar and told me to go pray. As I knelt, I repeated a covenant that came to my thoughts, and in taking it stressed I would be all honorable. Since that time, the people of the state of Utah who heard about my experience spread the worst kind of slander, stating I was trying to impress people, that I had seen one of the three Nephites. I was the victim of intense slandering, backbiting, and lying from the LDS and their offshoot groups. It states in the Book of Mormon, the LDS Gentiles would be the worst lying hypocrites in the world in the last days. They are described as, quote, "Oh, ye hypocrites, ye polluters, why have ye polluted the holy church of God? And they have built up secret abominations to get gain, and cause that widows and orphans should mourn before the Lord, and also the blood of their fathers and their husbands to cry unto the Lord from the ground for vengeance upon their heads, that the sword of vengeance hangs over them, and the time soon cometh that he avengeth the blood of the saints upon them, for he would not suffer the cries of the widows and the orphans any longer." Conditions in the LDS Church. To further reflect on this, and this is just reporting on other accounts from various people, trying to create a bigger picture of this. This video is an attempt to make sense of all of this. Why are these strange accounts of a strange talking individual just showing up in various places in our church, in our society, from Mormons and Catholics alike? The French Quebec individual stated he was raised a Catholic. Recorded history has shown that in addition to the Mobocrats, Joseph Smith was also betrayed by former church members and even church members of his life, of his time, who were represented in the mob that killed him, among with many others, of course. Many of the apostates who played a role were not known until decades later. Maybe not all of them were even found out. There was never a purging in the church of those who played a role in the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. Although those apostles most loyal to him realized the murderers were still in their midst. Now, what kind of condition would that be if Joseph Smith was murdered at that time, when there were some of the best people in the history of the church in the membership? Was it ever set back to a condition where Joseph Smith could come back and claim his rightful place? Think about that. There is no place for Joseph Smith in the LDS Church. After the passing of the apostles who personally knew Joseph Smith, there was no one left in the church in positions of influence who could adequately defend Joseph Smith and the true gospel Joseph Smith restored. The purging of authentic For example, 19th century spiritual and inspiring stories which took place in the early days of the church created a stigma after they got rid of that. It made it difficult to share spiritual and inspirational stories. There's still some preserved, and the membership in general yearns for those kinds of stories. The reported book burning occurred in the 1930s, where the church made big transitions to become a revised and different kind of church than they were from the original church. The call to action would be to work toward removing the stigmas the day that sharing spiritual stories will once again be considered acceptable in the modern culture. I have created a different channel to discuss some of the effects that we're seeing in the American society today. The election is coming up right after this video in a few days, by the time this video is made. There's just a few states that need to be stolen in order for the people in power to maintain power. I talk about how that would occur as a bit tongue-in-cheek. I will put that link in the description field. This concludes this video. If you watched to this point, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.